Emily Carter sat at her desk in Boston, her computer screen glowing faintly in the dim light of her apartment. She had been scrolling through real estate listings more out of habit than genuine intention, tired of the endless cycle of overpriced condos and uninspired suburban homes. But then, almost as if conjured for her alone, a single headline froze her hand on the mouse. Abandoned castle in Europe, available for restoration. The photo was grainy, yet unmistakable. Stone turrets, half swallowed by ivy. Windows shattered like broken promises. A structure that looked as though it had been waiting centuries for someone to breathe life into it again. Her heart thudded. Most people would laugh, dismissing it as impractical, a money pit, maybe even a scam. But for Emily, an architectural historian who had dedicated her career to studying forgotten buildings, it was not a ruin. It was an invitation. Still, she hesitated. The price was low, suspiciously so, but the conditions were clear. The buyer would inherit responsibility for all restoration costs. She could already imagine the faces of her friends, the cautious frown of her older sister, the flat disbelief in her boyfriend Mark's voice. They would say she was reckless, irresponsible, chasing fantasies. Yet as her fingers traced the photo on the screen, she felt a pull stronger than reason. "Am I really considering this?" she whispered to herself. The silence of her apartment offered no answer, only the hum of the radiator and the faint sound of traffic below. But deep down she knew. She had always craved more than lectures in classrooms and articles in journals. She wanted to touch history, to preserve it, to give it a voice again. And this crumbling castle, was daring her to take that step. Before we continue with Emily's story, take a moment to subscribe. That way you won't miss the unfolding chapters of this incredible journey. Her decision came in a single click. The email was sent, the inquiry made. Within days after legal confirmations and an almost surreal transfer of ownership, Emily Carter found herself no longer just a historian, but the sole owner of a castle thousands of miles away from the life she knew. Of course, reality rushed in the moment she shared the news. Mark's reaction had been immediate and sharp. "Emily, this is insane," he said, pacing her kitchen. "You think you can just fly over there and what? Patch up a few stones? You don't know what you're getting into." "I know enough," Emily replied, though her voice shook. "This is what I've always wanted, to restore something real, something that matters." "What about us? About your life here?" His tone carried both frustration and fear. She turned away, unable to answer directly. The truth was, she felt more alive in that moment of uncertainty than she had in years of predictable safety. Her sister was gentler, though equally skeptical. On a late-night call, Hannah sighed. "Em, you've always chased big dreams, but a castle? In Europe? You're talking about leaving everything behind." "I know," Emily said softly. "But maybe that's the point. Maybe I need to." She tried to push aside the doubts, but they followed her into her dreams, weaving themselves into visions of stone halls, echoing with forgotten footsteps, of long tables set for banquets that would never come, of walls whispering stories in languages she didn't yet understand. By the end of that restless week, she was resolved. The castle was no longer a possibility. It was a destiny. Boston, with all its comforts and confinements, could no longer hold her. She would face whatever awaited across the ocean. Emily Carter, 32, historian of lost places, was about to abandon the familiar for a future no one else believed in. Her story began not with certainty, but with a leap of faith. And as she packed away the first of her books, her thoughts lingered not on what she was leaving behind, but on the looming silhouette of ancient stone walls waiting for her touch. The unknown was no longer something to fear. It was something to chase. The morning Emily loaded her suitcase into the back of a taxi, Boston was still wrapped in a pale grey mist. The city looked softer that day, almost forgiving, though she knew it was only her heart adding layers of sentimentality to the brick buildings and narrow streets she had walked countless times. She clutched her passport, fingers damp with sweat, and whispered to herself, "This is it." No turning back. The decision to leave had not come without struggle. Every day since purchasing the castle, Her life had been a chorus of questions and doubts. Mark had grown increasingly frustrated, their conversations looping into the same arguments until the air between them felt brittle. "Emily, you're running from something," he accused one evening, leaning against the doorframe of her apartment. His tie was loose, his face tired from another long day at the firm. "This castle isn't a dream, it's a distraction. From me, from us, from reality." "It's not a distraction," she said firmly, though her voice cracked at the edges. "It's an opportunity, and I won't ignore it just because it scares you." His eyes narrowed, wounded pride mixing with desperation. "And what about us? Do we mean so little that you'd toss everything aside for a pile of stones on another continent?" Emily's silence was answer enough. He shook his head, muttered something under his breath, and left. The sound of the door closing echoed longer than it should have. Her sister Hannah was gentler but still unconvinced. They sat in a cafe near Harvard Square, steaming mugs of coffee between them. Hannah reached across the table, her eyes filled with both worry and admiration. "You've always been brave," Hannah said, "but bravery can turn into stubbornness if you're not careful. Are you sure this isn't just you trying to prove something?" Emily stirred her coffee slowly, watching the cream swirl into shapes that dissolved as quickly as they formed. "Maybe it is about proving something," she admitted, "but not to anyone else, to myself. I've spent years studying history from a distance. I want to be part of preserving it. I need to know I'm capable of more than theories and lectures." Hannah smiled faintly, though her sigh betrayed her fear. "Then promise me one thing. Don't lose yourself chasing ghosts." That night, as Emily packed, she lingered on every object she touched. The books she had collected since college, their spines creased with her notes. The framed photos from road trips with friends, now dulled with dust. The worn leather chair she had curled into during countless nights of research. Each item felt like a farewell, a quiet acknowledgement that the life she had built was dissolving into something new. She barely slept, listening to the city's heartbeat outside her window, the distant hum of cars, the occasional laugh from late-night wanderers, the faint echo of footsteps on the pavement. When dawn came, she stood by the glass and whispered goodbye to the skyline. The airport was a blur of lines, announcements, and hurried travelers. At the gate, she called her mother, who had been uncharacteristically quiet since learning of Emily's plans. "Just promise me you'll be careful," her mother said softly over the phone. "You've always chased dreams bigger than yourself. I admire that, but I worry too. Europe isn't Boston. You'll be far from home." "I know," Emily replied, her throat tight, "but I'll be okay. I need this." There was a pause, then the gentle sound of her mother's voice breaking. "Then go, and write to me when you can." Emily hung up before the tears could spill. She forced herself to breathe, to hold on to the steady flame of determination beneath the weight of so much doubt. As the plane lifted off the runway, she pressed her forehead against the cool glass. Below, Boston shrank into a patchwork of lights and shadows, the Charles River gleaming faintly in the morning sun. She thought of the castle waiting across the ocean, silent and forgotten, daring her to step into its history. For the first time in weeks, her chest loosened. She was no longer caught between choices. She was moving forward, and yet as clouds swallowed the view of her city, she wondered just how much of herself she was leaving behind. When the plane touched down in France, Emily's stomach tightened with both anticipation and unease. The airport in Marseille buzzed with hurried voices, clattering wheels, and the smell of strong coffee drifting from nearby kiosks. Everything felt both familiar and foreign, the same kind of chaos she knew from Boston, yet wrapped in accents and rhythms she wasn't used to. Dragging her suitcase through the terminal, she stepped outside and was struck by the sudden change of air. It was warmer than she expected, filled with the salty tang of the Mediterranean carried inland by the breeze. For a brief moment, she let herself smile. This wasn't Boston anymore. The drive to the town near the castle took nearly 2 hours. Her driver, a grey-haired man with weathered hands, spoke little English but offered polite nods and an occasional "oui." Through the window, Emily watched landscapes roll past, vineyards stretching endlessly, olive groves shimmering in the sun, hills dotted with stone farmhouses. The deeper they drove, the more modern highways gave way to narrow roads, winding through villages where shutters were painted in shades of blue and green, and locals gathered at cafes with small cups of espresso. When they finally reached the town, Emily's breath caught. It was smaller than she expected, charming, yes, but also cautious in its quietness. Narrow cobblestone streets wound through rows of centuries-old houses, their walls weathered but dignified. Laundry hung from balconies, and a church bell rang in the distance. Yet the people's eyes lingered when they saw her. Some nodded politely, but others whispered to each other, their gazes sharp with curiosity or even suspicion. Emily tried to shake it off, reminding herself she was an outsider, carrying news that would inevitably stir interest. But the unease lingered as she pulled her suitcase toward the modest inn where she had booked a room. The owner, a stout woman named Madame Laurent, greeted her with reserved warmth. "You are here for the chateau, yes?" she asked in careful English as she handed Emily the key. Emily nodded, smiling with nervous enthusiasm. "Yes, I bought it. I'm here to restore it." The woman's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, her smile tightening. "Ah, it has been many years since anyone cared for that place. Be careful, mademoiselle." "The chateau holds history." Emily wanted to ask more, but the woman turned briskly back to her work, leaving the warning to hang in the air like smoke. Later that afternoon, as she walked through the town square, she met Lucien Moreau. He was tall, with sharp features softened by age and eyes that carried the weight of stories unspoken. He introduced himself in fluent English, his tone formal but not unfriendly. "You must be Miss Carter. Word travels quickly in small towns." Emily gave a sheepish laugh. "I figured as much. And you are?" "A historian, like yourself, though my focus is local." His gaze studied her carefully, as though trying to measure her intentions. "The chateau is not just a building here. It is part of who we are, and part of what we prefer not to remember." "Why not?" she asked, curiosity overriding caution. Lucien tilted his head slightly, considering. "Because the past has sharp edges. Dig too deeply, and you may cut yourself." His words carried a warning, but Emily felt a spark of intrigue. "I'm not afraid of history," she said. He smiled faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Perhaps not yet." As evening fell, Emily returned to her room, her mind restless. The town was beautiful, yet filled with shadows she couldn't name. The people seemed guarded, protective of secrets she hadn't even begun to uncover. And Lucien, was he a potential ally or someone trying to keep her away from the truth? She lay awake long into the night, listening to the distant echo of the church bell. The castle loomed in her imagination, pulling her forward like a tide. Tomorrow she would finally see it with her own eyes. And something told her that once she did, there would be no turning back. The next morning, Emily rose early, her nerves buzzing as though she had been drinking coffee all night. The air outside the inn was crisp, carrying the faint scent of damp earth from the hills beyond the town. She met Lucien at the edge of the square, where he stood waiting with his old but sturdy car. "You are ready?" he asked, his expression unreadable. "As ready as I'll ever be," Emily replied, though her grip on the strap of her bag betrayed the tremor in her hand. They drove out of the town, the streets giving way to winding country roads that cut through rolling fields. Vines stretched across the land, heavy with fruit, while distant mountains framed the horizon like silent guardians. Emily tried to focus on the beauty, but her chest tightened with each passing mile. This was not just a road trip. This was her leap into the unknown, the moment when dream and reality would collide. Finally, Lucien slowed the car and pointed toward a rise in the distance. "There," he said simply. Emily leaned forward, her breath catching as the shape emerged from behind the trees. The castle rose above the valley like a memory carved in stone. Towers stood crooked against the sky, their tops broken, walls draped in ivy that clung stubbornly to crumbling rock. Parts of the roof had collapsed, leaving jagged gaps where sunlight poured in. Windows, dark and shattered, stared like hollow eyes. Her heart pounded. She whispered without meaning to, "It's beautiful." Lucien glanced at her, an eyebrow raised. "Most would say it is ruined." "Ruins can be beautiful," she said softly, her gaze locked on the castle. They just need someone willing to see it. When they reached the gates, or what was left of them, Emily stepped out, her shoes crunching against gravel and weeds. The air felt cooler here, as though the stones themselves exhaled a chill. She walked slowly toward the main archway, her fingers brushing against the rough walls. Time had scarred every inch, yet she felt something alive beneath the decay, as if the building itself was watching her. Inside, the silence was immense. Dust hung in the shafts of light that broke through the roof, drifting like tiny phantoms. The grand hall stretched before her. Its ceiling collapsed in sections, leaving piles of rubble across the cracked stone floor. A staircase curved upward, but ended abruptly where part of it had crumbled away. The air smelled of moss, old wood, and centuries of neglect. Emily's chest swelled with a strange mix of grief and awe. She could almost hear echoes of voices from long ago, the murmur of servants, the laughter of guests, the clatter of feasts. All gone, yet lingering in the bones of the place. Lucien's voice pulled her back. Many have looked at this castle and seen only ruin. They leave it to the vines and storms. What makes you different? She turned, meeting his steady gaze. Because I don't see an ending. I see a beginning. For the first time, Lucien's expression softened, though his tone remained guarded. Then you have much work ahead. This place will test you. I expect it to, Emily answered. And I welcome it. As dusk approached, she decided to stay the night. Lucien hesitated, but finally agreed to leave her with a lantern and his phone number written on a slip of paper. Alone, she set her sleeping bag in what had once been the great hall. The vastness around her pressed in, each creak of the structure stirring her imagination. Wind whistled through broken windows, carrying the scent of damp stone. Lying there in the half-dark, Emily felt fear coil in her stomach, but alongside it was something stronger, resolve. The castle was hers now, in all its ruin and majesty. And though the night ahead promised restlessness, she knew this was where her story truly began. The first full day inside the castle began with a chill that sank into Emily's bones. She woke stiff from the hard floor of the great hall, her lantern long since burned out. The early light that seeped through the cracked ceiling painted the walls in uneven streaks, revealing just how much damage the building had endured. It was no longer a romantic silhouette against the sky. It was a battlefield of stone, timber, and time. Armed with her notebook, Emily walked through the ruins, scribbling observations. Broken beams, water-stained walls, floors weakened by rot. Every step revealed a new wound. At first she felt overwhelmed, the sheer magnitude of the work pressing down on her chest. She whispered to herself, "One thing at a time, Emily. One thing at a time." By mid-morning, she made her way back to the town hall, determined to begin the process of permits and approvals. Inside, the air smelled faintly of ink and paper, the walls lined with framed photos of mayors past. Behind the desk sat Monsieur Dupont, the council clerk, his spectacles perched low on his nose. "You are the American?" he asked, peering at her with cautious curiosity. "Yes, Emily Carter. I bought the chateau." His eyebrows rose slightly. "Ambitious. Do you understand what this requires?" "The chateau is classified as a protected historical site. Any restoration must meet strict regulations. You cannot simply rebuild walls or replace roofs as you wish." "I expected restrictions," Emily said carefully. "But I want to restore it properly, with respect to its history." Dupont leaned back, his gaze sharp. "Respect is good. But respect does not pay for scaffolding, nor masons, nor endless inspections." Emily forced a smile. "I'll find a way." Yet as she left the town hall, clutching a thick packet of documents, her optimism faltered. The list of permits, fees, and conditions seemed endless. She knew her savings would stretch only so far. The reality of her choice was no longer distant. It was staring her in the face. Later, she returned to the castle and found Lucien waiting at the gates. His expression, as always, was unreadable. "You went to the council?" he asked. "Yes," Emily replied, lifting the packet. "They don't make it easy." Lucien gave a small shrug. "They never do. Many see your project as foolish, To them this place is a burden, not a treasure. Then I'll prove them wrong, she said, though her voice carried more defiance than confidence. Lucienne studied her quietly. You remind me of someone. The last owner, decades ago, spoke the same way. He dreamed of restoration too, but dreams do not always survive reality. His words lingered long after he left, like a shadow trailing her steps. That evening, as she explored the western wing of the castle, Emily stumbled upon a door wedged shut with debris. It took her nearly an hour to clear the broken stones and splintered wood blocking the way. When at last it creaked open, she found herself in a corridor choked with dust and silence. The air was heavier here, untouched for what felt like centuries. She lifted her lantern, revealing walls lined with faded murals, scenes of hunting, feasting, triumphs long forgotten. A thrill ran through her, tempered by unease. She had not expected this part of the castle to be accessible at all. At the far end of the corridor, another door stood locked. Its iron handle was rusted but intact. Emily tried it once, twice, but it would not budge. She pressed her palm against the wood, her pulse quickening. Something about the sealed chamber called to her, whispering of secrets hidden beyond. Exhaustion finally drove her back to the main hall, where she lit a small fire in a portable stove she had brought from town. As she ate a simple meal, her thoughts circled around the day's discoveries, the crushing bureaucracy, the mounting costs, the resistance from locals, and now a locked wing of the castle that seemed determined to guard its secrets. She stared into the fire, whispering to herself, "This place won't give up easily." But neither will I. The crackle of flames answered her vow, steady and defiant, a fragile echo of the strength she would need in the days ahead. The next morning, Emily returned to the locked corridor with a crowbar she had borrowed from a hardware shop in town. The shopkeeper had given her a long, skeptical look when she explained what she needed it for, muttering something under his breath about Americans chasing ghosts. She ignored the comment, though it lingered with her all the way back to the castle. Dust swirled as she forced open the door, the iron groaning in protest before finally yielding. The stale air that escaped carried the scent of damp stone, rotting wood, and something older, like forgotten parchment. Lantern in hand, Emily stepped inside. The corridor extended deeper than she expected, the ceiling arched and heavy with cobwebs. She whispered, "It's like the castle was holding its breath all this time." Each step revealed fragments of the past. Faded murals depicting grand hunts and banquets, cracked tiles beneath her feet, patterned with intricate designs. The silence was profound, broken only by the faint drip of water somewhere in the distance. The first room she entered seemed to have once been a study. A desk stood collapsed in the corner, its drawers swollen with moisture. She knelt and tugged one open, releasing a puff of dust. Inside were scraps of letters, ink smudged and edges eaten by time. She could barely make out the words, but the handwriting was elegant, flourished, undeniably from another century. She tucked the fragments carefully into her notebook, heart racing. Further in, she discovered what must have been a small library. Books lay scattered across the floor, their spines curled and brittle. She picked one up and the cover disintegrated in her hands. Beneath the ruin of pages, however, she found a cluster of sealed letters bound with a ribbon, faded to a ghost of red. She gasped softly, brushing away the dust. The wax seals were stamped with a crest she didn't recognize, a shield encircled by curling vines. She turned them over, unable to resist the thrill of holding words that had remained unread for more than 100 years. Her fingers tingled as though history itself had passed through her skin, but she stopped herself from opening them just yet. "Not here," she murmured. "Not in the dark." The lantern flickered, shadows stretching across the walls. Emily's chest tightened with a mix of exhilaration and unease. The deeper she ventured, the more it felt as though the castle itself was revealing parts of its soul, carefully, cautiously, as if testing her worthiness. At the far end of the wing, she reached a set of double doors, heavier and more ornate than the others. Their wooden panels were carved with intricate designs of vines and roses, though time had scarred them with cracks. She pushed, but the doors refused to budge, The iron hinges groaned but held firm, frustration mixed with anticipation. She pressed her forehead against the cold surface and whispered, "What are you hiding?" Her lantern sputtered, forcing her to retreat. She carried her discoveries back to the main hall, setting the sealed letters on a makeshift table. As she traced the faded crest with her fingertip, she felt a strange closeness to the people who had once lived here. These weren't just relics, they were voices reaching across time. Later, when Lucien arrived to check on her, she showed him the letters. His eyes widened briefly before he masked his reaction. "Where did you find these?" he asked, his tone sharper than usual. "In the hidden wing," Emily replied, "behind a door that hadn't been opened in decades, maybe longer." Lucien studied her carefully, then the crest on the wax. "You should be cautious. Some histories are better left sealed." Emily bristled. "I didn't come here to bury history again. I came to uncover it." His silence was heavy, but his gaze carried something unspoken, concern, maybe even fear. That night, as Emily lay awake, the unopened letters beside her, she felt the weight of discovery pressing down. The castle had given her a glimpse of its secrets, but she knew instinctively this was only the beginning. By the end of her first week, Emily had settled into a rhythm, if it could be called that. Days spent clearing debris, cataloguing fragile documents, and sketching restoration ideas filled her hours. At night, she lay awake, listening to the restless groans of the castle, as though it shifted in its sleep. But outside its walls, a storm was brewing. When she returned to the town for supplies, she noticed the shift. Conversations grew hushed when she entered shops. Smiles that had once been polite now flickered with unease. At the bakery, the woman behind the counter handed Emily her bread without a word. The air carried a subtle weight, like judgment thickening with every glance. At first, Emily tried to dismiss it as small-town curiosity. But one afternoon, she overheard two men whispering near the fountain in the square. "She'll dig too deep just like the others," one muttered in French. "And we know what happened then," the other replied. Emily stiffened, clutching her shopping bag tighter. The words weren't meant for her, but the meaning was clear. Her presence was unwelcome. Later, she found Lucien outside the town hall and confronted him. "Why does everyone look at me like I'm dragging trouble into their lives?" Lucien's face darkened, but he didn't flinch at her bluntness. "Because to them you are. The chateau carries a history tied to arrogance, betrayal, and loss. Families here still tell the stories. They don't want the past stirred up." "Stories aren't facts," Emily argued. "They are when people believe them." That night she returned to the castle to find a cruel reminder of that resistance. Her tools, carefully arranged in a corner, were scattered across the floor. Some were missing entirely. On one wall, black paint dripped from hastily scrawled words in French. She translated haltingly, her stomach twisting. "Leave it to the dead." Emily's hands trembled as she traced the letters, anger flaring beneath her fear. Someone had been inside her castle, violating what little sanctuary she had built. The next morning, she marched into town, determination burning in her chest. She stormed into the cafe where she had seen several of the townsfolk gathered before. The room fell silent as she entered. "Whoever thinks they can scare me off," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the quiet, "you're wasting your time. I came here to restore the chateau, not to destroy it. If you don't want to help, fine, but don't stand in my way." A murmur rippled through the room. Some lowered their eyes. Others stared at her with open defiance. Only one elderly man at the back spoke, his voice rough with age. "You don't understand what that place holds," he said. "Better people than you tried and failed. Don't think you're stronger." Emily's jaw tightened. "Maybe I don't understand yet, but I will, and I won't fail." She left before they could answer, her pulse hammering in her ears. Back at the castle, she stood in the great hall staring at the vandalized wall. For a long moment, doubt gnawed at her edges. Maybe she really was in over her head. Maybe the town's hostility was a warning she should take seriously. But then she remembered the sealed letters, the faded crest, the hidden corridor waiting to be explored. She remembered the awe she had felt the first time she touched the castle's stones, and she realized she wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for the stories trapped within these walls. Kneeling, she scrubbed at the painted words until her arms ached. By the time the sun set, her hands were raw, but the wall was clean again. She stood back, breathing hard, and whispered, "You can try to scare me, but I'm not leaving." The castle loomed above her, silent but steadfast, as though it approved. It was late afternoon when Emily first saw Isabelle Fournier. The sun was beginning its descent behind the hills, casting a golden light over the town square. Emily was returning from the market when she noticed a woman walking toward her, carrying a roll of blueprints under one arm. Her steps were purposeful, and she wore a hard hat, her boots caked with dust. "Are you Emily Carter?" the woman asked in a crisp French accent. Emily nodded, intrigued. "Yes, that's me, and you are?" "I'm Isabelle Fournier." "I've heard you've taken on the chateau." Isabelle's gaze flickered briefly to the distant outline of the castle, her eyes narrowing as if measuring it. "I'm an architect. I specialize in restoration work." Emily blinked, unsure what to say. "You've come to help," Isabelle shrugged. "I've been told you're stubborn." "I'm here to see if that's true." There was something about Isabelle that made Emily both wary and hopeful. Her bluntness was disarming, and yet there was an air of competence in the way she stood, surveying everything with a sharp eye. "I'm not exactly sure where to start," Emily admitted. Isabelle smiled faintly. "I've worked on many projects like yours, restoring ruins, working against time. If you're serious, I can help, but it won't be easy. Not with the council, not with the locals. The chateau has more than one kind of history, and most people are better off leaving it behind." "Why are you offering to help, then?" Emily asked, still cautious. Isabelle's expression softened slightly. "Because I think it's worth saving. The chateau has stories that should be told. But that's up to you, not the town." The offer was tempting, but Emily wasn't sure she could trust someone so quickly. She had already seen how deeply the past of the chateau cut into the present, yet something in Isabelle's words resonated. "I could use someone who knows what they're doing," Emily said finally. Isabelle nodded, rolling the blueprints out on a nearby table in the cafe. "I'll draw up a restoration plan, but before we begin, there's someone you should meet, Gérard Lefebvre." Emily frowned. "Who is he?" "A businessman. He's been trying to buy the chateau from you. He doesn't want it restored. He wants to turn it into a hotel, and he's willing to do whatever it takes to get his hands on the land." Emily's heart sank. She'd heard the rumors about Gérard, the wealthy man who wanted to commercialize the chateau's land. But hearing it from Isabelle made it feel all the more real. "Do you think he'll try to force me out?" Emily asked. Isabelle's gaze was firm. "Not if we're prepared, but you need to be careful. He has influence. Not just in the town, but beyond it." The conversation weighed on Emily as she left the cafe, Isabelle's words echoing in her mind. As she approached the castle, she felt the oppressive weight of the challenges ahead. The promise of allies like Isabelle was reassuring, but the reality of her situation was never far from her thoughts. The next morning, as if to reinforce Isabelle's warning, Emily found herself face to face with Gérard Lefebvre in the town square. He was tall, impeccably dressed, his tailored suit standing in stark contrast to the worn buildings around them. He gave her a sharp smile, but there was no warmth in it, only a cold calculation. "I've heard you've been making a mess of things at the chateau," Gérard said, his voice smooth but carrying an edge. "You'll be wasting your time. The land should be used for something more profitable." Emily stood her ground, her pulse quickening. "I'm not interested in selling." "Then perhaps I can convince you," Gérard said, his smile never faltering. "The chateau could be a beautiful hotel, a luxury destination. Think of the income it could bring to the town. You wouldn't want to be remembered as the woman who let something so valuable fall to ruin, would you?" His words were laced with a threat, subtle but clear. Emily's stomach churned, but she didn't show it. "This is my project, not yours. And I'll decide what happens to it." Gérard's smile faded, and for a moment Emily saw a flash of anger in his eyes. "We'll see about that." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Emily standing in the square, her resolve hardening. She had her first taste of what it would be like to fight for the chateau, not just against time and decay, but against people who saw it only as a commodity. But she was no longer afraid. She had allies now, and the chateau's story would be told on her terms, no one else's. As days turned into weeks, Emily's relationship with the chateau deepened. The work was grueling, yet the castle seemed to pulse with life under her hands. Each broken window she repaired, each fallen beam she replaced, brought her closer to its soul. But it was the discovery of the library that would change everything. She had heard rumors from Isabelle and Lucien about a hidden library somewhere in the chateau, but no one could tell her exactly where it was. No one had seen it in years, perhaps decades. The idea of a forgotten library, filled with books that could hold secrets about the chateau's history, kept Emily up at night, her curiosity gnawing at her. One late afternoon, after a long day of work, Emily wandered into a forgotten wing of the castle. The dust was thicker here and the air felt colder. Her lantern light flickered in the dark hallway as she carefully walked forward. She reached the end of the corridor and found a heavy wooden door, almost hidden behind layers of ivy and neglect. She pushed it open, and the smell of ancient paper and mildew hit her. The room was large, with shelves that stretched from floor to ceiling, crammed with books and scrolls. Some of the books were so old the leather bindings had cracked, while others looked as though they had never been touched. The floors creaked under her feet as she moved deeper into the room. The silence was profound, a stillness that seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her to discover what had been hidden here for so long. Emily ran her fingers over the spines of the books, pulling a few from the shelves. They were mostly in French, with delicate handwriting scribbled in the margins. Her pulse quickened as she flipped through the pages, reading snippets of history, family names, and dates. But it wasn't just history she was finding, it was something darker. One journal, bound in faded brown leather, caught her eye. The writing was more recent than the others, dated only a few years before the castle had been abandoned. It belonged to Countess Marguerite, the last noblewoman to reside in the chateau. Emily's heart raced as she read the first few lines. "I can feel it closing in on me. The debts are unbearable and the land is slipping through our fingers. The estate is no longer the proud symbol it once was. Soon there will be nothing left, and my name will fade with the last of the autumn leaves." The words spoke of a woman on the brink of ruin, a family losing its grasp on power. Emily's eyes were drawn further into the pages, each entry filled with despair and frustration. There were mentions of a hidden vault, a treasure meant to save the family, and of rivals within the castle who plotted against each other. She closed the journal, her mind racing. There were more entries, more pages, but she could feel the weight of the room pressing in on her, as if the castle itself didn't want her to know these secrets. Before she could gather herself, she heard the sound of footsteps outside the library door. Her heart leaped into her throat as she quickly hid the journal in her bag. The door creaked open, and Lucien stepped inside. "You found it, haven't you?" he asked, his voice low, knowing. Emily nodded, clutching the bag to her chest. "It's all here. The history, the truth." Countess Marguerite was trying to save the family. There's mention of treasure hidden somewhere in the chateau. Lucien's expression darkened. "You shouldn't have read that." "I had to," Emily said, her voice shaking with the weight of the discovery. "There's so much more here, things the town doesn't know. Things they don't want me to find." Lucien sighed and walked toward her, his eyes heavy with something unspoken. "Some histories are better left buried, Emily. The chateau's past is a tangled web. There are people in this town who would go to great lengths to keep these secrets hidden. But why? What happened to Marguerite? What's hidden here?" Lucien met her gaze, his eyes filled with reluctance. "You're better off not knowing." His warning hung in the air, but Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she had already crossed a line, one that could never be uncrossed. The more she learned about the chateau's past, the more it seemed to pull her into its tangled history, and the deeper the danger became. As Lucien left, she stayed in the library, the dim light of her lantern casting long shadows over the shelves. She knew one thing for certain. The secrets of this castle weren't just a matter of history. They were a matter of survival. And now that she had uncovered the truth, there was no turning back. Emily woke to the sound of heavy rain battering against the castle windows. The storm had come suddenly, as though the weather itself had conspired to match her dark mood. The walls of the chateau groaned in protest as gusts of wind swept through the broken windows, sending a chill through the rooms. It was a reminder, something she didn't need, that this place, in all its grandeur and decay, could never truly be controlled. The days had become harder to navigate. The deeper she dug into the castle's past, the more obstacles seemed to appear in her path. Each visit to the town felt like an encounter with resistance, not just from the people, but from the land itself. The chateau had a way of showing her both its beauty and its cruelty in equal measure. Her conversations with Lucien had grown colder. He seemed to withdraw, as though the closer she came to uncovering the secrets of the castle, the more he pushed her away. Isabel had remained steadfast, offering her assistance and an unyielding presence, but Emily felt herself isolated, even as she fought for the chateau's future. And then there was Mark. His visit had been the tipping point. He had come to see her, thinking he could convince her to return to Boston. His face, worn with worry, had been the first thing she noticed when he stepped off the bus, his eyes searching for a trace of the woman he had left behind. "Emily," he said, his voice hoarse with exhaustion, "I don't understand. This place, it's breaking you. You've barely slept, you're fighting with everyone, and for what? A castle that's falling apart." "I can't leave it, Mark," she replied, her voice sharper than she intended. "I need to finish what I started." He looked at her with a mix of concern and frustration. "But at what cost? You've put everything into this. You're losing yourself in the process." "I'm not losing myself," she said, though doubt crept into her words. "I'm finding something that matters." He reached for her hand, but she pulled it away. "I can't do this anymore. I can't keep waiting for you to come back." His words stung more than she wanted to admit. He was right, in many ways. She had become consumed by the chateau, by its mysteries and its history, but she couldn't stop now. She couldn't let the past win, no matter the personal cost. The argument ended with Mark leaving, his steps echoing in the empty hallways of the chateau. His departure felt like the final blow in a string of losses she had suffered since arriving. She had lost her old life, her relationship, and now she was losing her sense of purpose. The castle, for all its promise, was becoming a prison. That night, as she sat in the great hall, staring at the fire crackling in the hearth, the weight of her decisions pressed heavily on her chest, the chateau, the place that had once felt like a dream, now felt like a tomb. The faces of the people she had left behind in Boston haunted her thoughts, their doubts and fears mingling with her own. Lucien's words echoed in her mind, too. Some histories are better left buried. He had warned her about digging too deep, but now, even if she wanted to stop, she couldn't. The history of the chateau was a living thing, breathing through the cracks in its walls, whispering to her in the silence of the night. Her head dropped into her hands, and for the first time since she arrived, she allowed herself to break down. The tears flowed freely, as though they had been waiting for this moment. She cried for everything, the loss, the isolation, the overwhelming burden of what she had taken on. But even as she cried, a part of her knew this wasn't the end. It couldn't be. As the storm raged outside, Emily made a silent vow to herself. No matter how hard it became, no matter how much she lost along the way, she would finish what she had started. She would restore the chateau. And she would uncover every secret it held, no matter the cost. The days following Mark's departure were the hardest Emily had faced so far. The chateau seemed to grow more oppressive with each passing moment, as though the walls themselves had absorbed her grief and doubts, but something had shifted in her. The breaking point had cracked open a new resolve within her, a burning need to finish what she had started. The rain had stopped, leaving the ground slick and muddy. As Emily made her way toward the eastern wing of the chateau, she felt the weight of the past pressing down on her. The discoveries she had made, about Countess Marguerite, the hidden vault, the whispers of treasure and betrayal, had become an obsession. She couldn't stop now. The pieces of the puzzle were finally coming together, and she was determined to find the missing ones. Isabel had come by the chateau earlier in the week to give her an update on the restoration plans. She'd been blunt, as usual, but there was something different in her demeanor. She had warned Emily that there would be more opposition from the town and that they needed to be prepared for the fallout. Gerard Lefebvre's influence was growing, and if Emily wasn't careful, he would find a way to force her out of the chateau. "You can't let him win," Isabel had said firmly, her eyes locking with Emily's. "You're not just fighting for this place, Emily. You're fighting for its history, for the people who once lived here, for everything this chateau represents." Emily hadn't responded immediately, but those words had stayed with her, fueling her determination. Now standing in front of the massive fireplace in the eastern wing, Emily felt a sense of urgency she hadn't experienced before. She had already searched the library and the hidden corridors, but she knew there was something more to the chateau, something that had been hidden for generations, something that would finally tie together all the loose threads. The room before her was dark, the air thick with dust. The floorboards creaked beneath her weight as she stepped cautiously into the room. It had once been a grand salon, judging by the remnants of ornate furniture and tattered curtains that hung limply from the walls. There were no windows on this side, only small slits that let in faint shafts of light. Her lantern flickered as she moved toward a large ornate cabinet in the corner. She had been eyeing it for days, wondering if it held anything of significance. The cabinet had once been a beautiful piece of craftsmanship, but now its wood was cracked, its glass shattered. Emily ran her fingers along the edge of the cabinet, gently pushing aside the broken shards of glass. The cabinet door creaked as she pried it open, revealing a small collection of old objects, nothing of immediate value. But as her eyes swept over the contents, she noticed something hidden behind a stack of old books. A small metal box, intricately designed, lay partially obscured by the debris. Her heart raced as she pulled the box from its hiding place. The metal was cool to the touch, and as she turned it over in her hands, she noticed a familiar crest, the same one she had seen on the letters in the library, the crest of the de Villiers family, the chateau's original owners. Emily's breath caught in her throat as she carefully opened the box. Inside was a collection of papers, yellowed with age, but still legible. She began reading, her fingers trembling as she deciphered the handwriting. The papers were contracts, letters, and financial documents, proof of the de Villiers family's decline, their desperate attempts to hold on to their legacy. But then, buried in the middle of the stack was something else. A letter written by Countess Marguerite herself, dated just days before her departure from the chateau. "I fear I have lost everything. The debts are too great and the betrayal runs deeper than I could have imagined. I will leave the chateau, but I have hidden something here, something that will save our family, if only it is found. It is buried beneath the floorboards of the main hall. I pray it will be enough." Emily's heart skipped a beat. The treasure, the key to the chateau's survival, was hidden beneath the floorboards. She had found it. She knew at that moment that there was no turning back. The chateau was not just a building, it was a piece of history, a legacy that needed to be preserved. The treasure hidden beneath its floors wasn't just gold or jewels. It was the future of the chateau, and Emily was its last hope. With renewed determination, she set her sights on the main hall, ready to uncover the final secret that would tie the chateau's past to its future. The main hall loomed before Emily, its grandeur both awe-inspiring and oppressive. The storm had passed, leaving the air heavy with the scent of wet earth. She stood in the doorway, the lantern in her hand casting long shadows on the cold stone floor. It had been weeks since the discovery of Countess Marguerite's letter, but the urgency she felt hadn't faded. In fact, it had only grown stronger. "The treasure is beneath the floorboards." Those words echoed in her mind as she stepped into the room, her boots scraping the dust from the floor. She had already spent countless hours in this hall, restoring parts of the ceiling and cleaning the broken windows. But today it wasn't the surface she sought to repair. Today she was going to dig beneath it all, literally and figuratively. She moved cautiously toward the center of the room, her eyes scanning the floorboards for any sign of a hidden compartment. The great hall had been the heart of the chateau, where banquets and dances had once been held. Now it was a hollow shell, the remnants of its former glory faded by time and neglect. The walls, once adorned with rich tapestries, were now bare and cracked, and the grand fireplace loomed like a hollow maw at one end of the room. The long table that would have hosted countless guests lay in pieces, the chairs overturned and forgotten. The space felt empty, yet alive with history. Her hands trembled slightly as she knelt, running her fingers over the floorboards. They were old, warped with age, but solid. As she pressed down on one of the boards near the fireplace, she heard a faint creak. Her heart skipped a beat. This is it. She didn't waste another second. Using the crowbar she had found in the storage room, she wedged it beneath the edge of the board and pried it loose. The wood groaned, but finally it gave way, revealing a small dark cavity beneath. Her breath caught as she reached in, pulling out a small chest. It was made of heavy, weathered wood, its metal corners tarnished with age. The chest was locked, but the intricate design of the lock looked old and worn, as though it had been untouched for centuries. Emily's pulse quickened as she worked the lock free, her hands shaking with anticipation. With a final click, the chest opened. Inside, nestled among layers of old cloth, were a series of documents. She carefully pulled them out, scanning the papers with trembling fingers. The first document was a will, dated long before the chateau's fall from grace. It named the de Villiers family as heirs to a vast fortune that had once been hidden away, but it also spoke of a great betrayal, an attempt to usurp the family's power, and a warning that the treasure would only be passed down to those deemed worthy. Emily's heart pounded as she read on. The treasure was not a simple chest of jewels, as she had first imagined. It was something far more valuable: knowledge. The documents contained records of land ownership, secret alliances, and hidden assets, all of which had been concealed by Marguerite and her family, in an effort to protect their legacy from enemies who had long since vanished into history. As Emily flipped through the papers, she noticed a map, a hand-drawn chart of the chateau's grounds with markings that indicated hidden passages, tunnels, and vaults beneath the estate. This was it. This was what Marguerite had left behind, a map to the true treasure of the chateau. Her mind raced with possibilities. This was the key to securing the chateau's future, not just for herself but for the town as well. If she could reveal these secrets to the town council, to the people who had opposed her, she could prove that the chateau wasn't just a crumbling relic of the past. It was a part of their history, and it could be the key to their future. But as she studied the map, a thought gnawed at her. The treasure Marguerite had hidden wasn't just wealth, it was power. And in the wrong hands, that power could be dangerous. The door creaked behind her, and she spun around, startled. Lucien stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "I thought you'd find it," he said softly. Emily froze, her heart thudding in her chest. "You knew about this?" Lucien stepped into the room, his gaze lingering on the chest in her hands. "I suspected. But some things are better left uncovered. This chateau has been through too much. It has been buried under secrets and lies for too long." Emily's fingers tightened around the map. "I can't ignore it. This is what Marguerite left behind. This is the chateau's future." Lucien's eyes darkened. "You don't understand, Emily. Some secrets should stay hidden." For the first time, Emily saw the fear in his eyes. "Why are you so afraid?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mix of frustration and fear. Lucien didn't answer. Instead, he turned and walked out, leaving Emily alone in the darkened hall with the weight of the chateau's past and its future crushing down on her. The days following Emily's discovery felt heavier than ever. She couldn't shake the tension that had settled in her chest since finding the map, those marked tunnels, secret vaults, hidden treasures. The weight of the chateau's legacy had become unbearable. It was no longer just about restoring a building. It was about restoring the power that had once belonged to its family, a power that could either save or destroy everything. Her every step through the chateau felt like a crossing of lines, as if each room held a secret, each hallway a warning. But it wasn't just the chateau's secrets that haunted her. Gerard Lefebvre's threats had grown more insistent. The council was pressuring her to make a decision, and with each passing day, he was becoming bolder. He wasn't just trying to buy the chateau anymore, He was trying to break her resolve. That morning, as she entered the town square for yet another tense meeting with the council, Emily's stomach twisted in knots. The council members were seated at their usual table, eyes flicking nervously between her and Gerard, who was leaning back in his chair with a smug smile, his suit impeccably pressed. "You've done quite a bit of work on the chateau, Miss Carter," Gerard said, his voice laced with a mock sweetness. "But I'm afraid you're not the right person to make decisions for its future." Emily stood tall, ignoring the way her hands clenched at her sides. "I don't need anyone else to make decisions for me," she said firmly. "The chateau is part of this town's history, and it's time we embraced that." Gerard's smile faltered for just a moment. "It's time to move forward, not cling to the past. You're holding on to a crumbling monument that will cost us all. Let me help you. Sell it to me." The room grew quiet, every eye in the town square on Emily. The pressure was suffocating, but she wouldn't let it break her. She glanced at Isabel, who was seated at the back of the room, her expression a mix of concern and hope. Then she turned to Lucien, who stood silently at the door, his face unreadable. Emily knew what she had to do. She took a breath, her voice steady. "I've found something," she said, holding up the map, the key to everything that had been hidden beneath the chateau. "This isn't just a ruin. It's a treasure trove of history, a legacy that belongs to the people who built this town. It's time we claim it." The council members exchanged glances, unsure of what to make of her sudden confidence. Gerard's face twisted in annoyance, but Emily didn't back down. She walked toward the table, her heels clicking sharply on the stone floor. "If you want to save this town, if you want to restore what was lost, we need to stop thinking about profit and start thinking about preservation. I'm not selling. I'm restoring." Gerard's anger bubbled to the surface, his hands slamming onto the table. "You think you can stand against me?" he spat, his voice low and threatening. "I have the power to ruin you, Emily. You'll regret this." But Emily wasn't afraid anymore. She had seen the strength of the chateau's past, felt the weight of its secrets pressing into her every day. She had a choice now, and it wasn't just about the chateau. It was about the town's future, about showing everyone what could be done if they worked together. "No, Gerard," she said, her voice calm but unyielding. "You're the one who will regret underestimating me." The room fell silent. Emily turned toward the council, standing with the same unwavering determination she had felt when she first set foot in the chateau. "I'll restore the chateau, and I'll uncover everything it holds. But I need your support. This place isn't just a piece of real estate. It's a piece of history, and it's time we give it the respect it deserves." For a long moment no one spoke. Gerard's eyes were narrow, calculating, but he knew he had lost. The council members exchanged reluctant glances, but then, one by one, they nodded. "Fine," one of them said, a man whose name Emily couldn't remember. "You've made your case. We'll back you." It wasn't a unanimous victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. Gerard's expression twisted with frustration, but he stood up without another word and walked out of the room. As the door slammed behind him, Emily felt a weight lift off her shoulders. The battle wasn't over, but this was a moment of triumph. She had fought for the chateau, for the town, and for its history, and she had won. She turned to Isabel, who was already standing and walking toward her with a smile. Lucien followed close behind. "You did it," Isabel said, her voice filled with pride. "I couldn't have done it without you," Emily replied, her smile a mix of exhaustion and relief. Lucien's gaze softened, his earlier reservations melting away. "I'm proud of you, Emily. You've proven that the chateau is worth saving." Emily looked out the window, her eyes tracing the outline of the chateau in the distance. She had won this battle, but there were still many more ahead, and for the first time she felt ready to face them. A year had passed since the council's reluctant approval of Emily's plans to restore the chateau, and the transformation was nothing short of miraculous. What had once been a crumbling monument to forgotten grandeur was now teeming with life, renewed life, built from the ground up with care, respect, and a stubborn belief in the value of history. Emily stood in the great hall, looking around at the work completed so far. The walls, once battered by time and neglect, had been repaired and repainted, their deep stone surfaces gleaming in the soft light of the afternoon. The massive windows, shattered and boarded up for years, were now filled with sparkling glass, allowing the sunlight to flood the room. The cold, empty space felt warm, as though it had come alive again. Every corner of the chateau bore the fingerprints of countless hours of labor, not just from Emily, but from the people of the town. Isabel had returned frequently, drawing up plans and overseeing the work, and Lucien had spent his days tirelessly assisting with the historical research needed to restore the chateau's most delicate features. The townspeople, once skeptical of Emily's dream, had become her allies, eager to see the chateau reborn as a symbol of their shared history. Emily's heart swelled with pride as she walked through the halls, her footsteps echoing against the freshly restored floors. She had done it. The chateau was no longer just a forgotten relic, it was alive again, both in spirit and in purpose. The work was far from over, but it had come so far. It wasn't just the restoration that had changed the chateau, the town had changed too. Where once there had been doubt and fear, now there was hope. The cafe, the bakery, the small shops, all of them had flourished, their windows open to welcome both tourists and locals alike. Emily had fought not just for the chateau, but for the community that had once turned its back on it. And now the chateau was a source of pride, not just for her, but for everyone who had helped bring it back to life. As she made her way toward the central courtyard, her mind wandered back to the days when she had arrived at the chateau, uncertain and alone. She had been so sure that she was the only one who could save it, but now she knew better. She hadn't done it alone. Isabel approached from behind, wiping her hands on a cloth. "You've done it, Emily, you've really done it." Her voice was filled with admiration, but there was something else in it too, something softer, almost wistful. "We've done it," Emily corrected, smiling. "I couldn't have done it without you. Without all of you." Isabel chuckled softly. "You've made this place your own. You've breathed life back into it." "I think it's the chateau that's breathed life into me," Emily said quietly. "It's been more than just restoring walls and windows. It's been about reclaiming something, about remembering who we were and who we can be again." Lucien joined them in the courtyard, his face softer than it had been during their earlier meetings. The tension that had once defined his relationship with Emily seemed to have dissolved, replaced by a shared respect. "It looks different," Lucien remarked, his voice carrying a note of pride. "Better, even. I didn't think it was possible." Emily laughed. "I don't think any of us did." He smiled, and for a moment it felt as if the chateau had healed not just its stones, but the rift between them. The secrets, the fears, and the doubts that had plagued them all seemed to dissipate with the spring air that swept through the courtyard. "The town will hold a grand opening in a few weeks," Isabel said, her eyes twinkling. "It's time for everyone to see what we've accomplished, to see how far we've come." Emily looked out toward the distant hills, where the chateau stood as a sentinel over the land. It was no longer just a building, it was a testament to resilience, to the belief that anything could be restored if enough people were willing to fight for it. She turned back to her friends, her heart full of gratitude. "This is only the beginning," she said, her voice steady but full of emotion. "We've brought the chateau back to life, and now we get to share it with the world. This place has so much more to offer." The three of them stood there for a long moment, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The chateau had been reborn, and so had they. And in that moment, Emily knew she had found not just a place to restore, but a home, one that would continue to grow and evolve, just as she had. The grand opening of the chateau was a day Emily would never forget. As the sun rose over the hills, casting a soft golden light over the freshly restored building, the town gathered in the courtyard to celebrate the culmination of a year's worth of hard work and determination. The once crumbling castle had become a symbol of revival, a beacon of what could be accomplished when a community came together. The townspeople, who had once eyed Emily with suspicion, now looked at her with admiration. The doors of the chateau were wide open, inviting everyone in, from curious tourists to proud locals. There was laughter and chatter in the air, the clink of glasses and the hum of music as people wandered through the rooms, marveling at the restoration. Emily stood at the entrance, watching it all unfold. She had come to France with little more than a dream that had often seemed impossible. But now the chateau had not only been brought back to life, it had become the heart of the town once more. Isabel stood beside her, a proud smile on her face. "I told you it was worth it," she said, her voice full of satisfaction. "Look at what you've done." "What we've all done." Emily smiled back, her eyes misty. "I couldn't have done it without you, without all of you." Lucien approached, his demeanor more relaxed than it had ever been. He no longer carried the weight of caution and doubt that had once defined his relationship with Emily. Instead, there was a quiet pride in his eyes. "You've proven me wrong," he said softly, his voice filled with warmth. "I didn't believe in this place the way you did. But now I see it for what it truly is." Emily's heart swelled with gratitude. "You were right about one thing," she said. "Some histories are better left uncovered. But only because there's so much more to learn when we finally do." The grand hall was alive with energy, as people marveled at the intricate details of the restoration. Faded tapestries now restored to their original brilliance, the grand staircase gleaming in the soft light, the portraits of long-forgotten ancestors hanging proudly once again. Every corner of the chateau seemed to tell a story, each room brimming with history and life. As the evening wore on, Emily found herself standing alone in the great hall, watching the townspeople mingle, their faces full of hope and pride. The weight of the past, once so heavy, had been lifted. The chateau was no longer a forgotten relic, a place of decay. It had become a testament to resilience, to the power of community, and to the belief that anything, no matter how broken, could be restored with enough heart and effort. She looked out through the large windows, over the town she had come to love, the hills stretching out in the distance. The chateau had given her more than a purpose. It had given her a sense of belonging. She had found her place not just within its walls, but within the community that had embraced her and the legacy she had fought to protect. Isabel approached again, this time with a glass of wine in hand. "A toast," she said, raising the glass toward Emily. "To the chateau, to the town, and to the future." Emily raised her glass, her heart full. To the future. The sound of glasses clinking echoed in the room, the warmth of the moment wrapping around her like a comforting embrace. The chateau had been reborn, and so had she. As the evening faded into night, Emily stood there, a quiet smile on her lips. She had come to France seeking something she couldn't quite name. Now standing in the heart of a community that had once been fractured, now united through the chateau, she realized that she had found not just a place to restore, but a home. And as the stars twinkled above the chateau, she knew that the legacy she had helped create would endure for generations to come.